I knew something was wrong the second Nathan tapped his fork against Diane Hale's crystal wine glass. That sound, sharp, showy, meant to command attention, was the same sound he used whenever he was about to humiliate me in front of people who'd applaud him for it. The Hale dining room glowed like a staged photograph. The candles, the polished silver, the linen napkins folded into perfect little swans. Diane had arranged everything as if the evening were a celebration of her, not my arrival home after 4 months overseas. Nathan rose slowly, smiling with the confidence of a man who believed consequences were for other people. "Before we eat," he announced, raising his glass, "I have something big to share." My chest tightened. Tyler grinned. Diane leaned forward like she already knew. Then Nathan said the words that froze the room around me. "I sold Emily's little cabin in Silverwood Ridge for $60,000. He lifted his glass toward the extravagant spread on the table. "And this beautiful dinner? Paid for entirely from the sale. At least one meal is covered." The room erupted applause, laughter, clinking glasses. Diane actually dabbed at the corner of her eye. "That's my boy," she whispered. Nathan set his wine down, opened his leather folder, and fanned out page after page of documents. My name scrawled across every line in a signature that looked like mine, but felt wrong in the gut-deep way. Something forged always does. I didn't say a word. Not when Tyler whistled. Not when Kelsey murmured, "Wow, you handled everything?" Not even when Diane said, "Well, Emily, at least you contributed something while you were gone." Because that was when my phone vibrated. Once, twice, a third time insistent. I slid it out below the tablecloth. Logan Pierce, attorney for the buyers. I stepped away from the table just as I answered the call. "Miss Lane?" Logan's voice cracked with panic. "Why are there federal agents tearing apart our office? They're asking about restricted assets and forged signatures. What kind of property did your husband sell us?" My heart didn't pound. It stopped. Because hours earlier, on the plane home, I'd gotten a text from an unknown number. They're messing with something they shouldn't. "Don't say anything tonight." And now I understood. Nathan hadn't just sold my cabin. He'd triggered a federal security alarm he didn't even know existed. And the agents were already coming. People think a marriage cracks because of one big betrayal. They're wrong. It cracks from the inside out slowly, quietly, until the moment you finally see the fractures that were always there. For the first 2 years, I tried to be the kind of wife the Hale family approved of, which meant Sunday dinners, whether I wanted to go or not, arriving with a homemade dish, smiling through the snide comments, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. Nathan called it keeping tradition alive. I called it surviving. Back then, I still believed effort mattered. In year 1, I learned quickly that Diane Hale ruled her household like a CEO. Every dinner had an unspoken seating chart, an unspoken dress code, and an unspoken ranking of who mattered. Spoiler: I was always at the bottom. Gerald Hale treated me like the administrative assistant he never had, handing me coats, asking me to refill drinks, giving me directions instead of conversation. Nathan told me not to take it personally. He always said that, about everything. By year 2, I could predict the rhythm of Hale dinners. Diane would ask about Nathan's career prospects as if he were a rising star at his mid-tier insurance firm. Gerald would drone on about market forecasts. Tyler, Nathan's younger brother, would contribute jokes and questionable business schemes. Any attempt I made to talk about my work compliance auditing, supply chain oversight, the intense hours was met with polite nods and immediate subject changes. One night, early in year 2, Diane forgot to place a setting for me at Thanksgiving. She looked directly at the empty space, frowned, and said, "Oh, I didn't realize Emily was joining us." I'd been standing next to Nathan the entire time. He didn't correct her. He never corrected her. By year 3, I'd stopped expecting anything from them, and I'd started dreaming of escape. That was when I found Silverwood Ridge. I remember the drive like a photograph. A narrow road winding through tall pine trees, sunlight cutting in golden strips, the air smelling like cold water and cedar. Eleanor Price, the elderly widow selling the place, was waiting outside the cabin in a faded flannel shirt and hiking boots, the kind of woman who looked like she'd never needed anyone's permission to take up space. "It's not much," she told me, hands tucked in her pockets. "But it's honest. My husband built half of it himself." Her eyes softened. Some forests belong only to people who truly need them. I didn't realize until later how badly I needed something of my own. The price was low. Too low. Eleanor said she wasn't interested in squeezing every dollar out of it. I just want it to go to the right person, she told me. Someone who knows how to value silence. I signed the papers using my maiden name, Lane, because that account the savings that funded the down payment was mine alone. Every dollar came from freelance projects, skipped lunches, thrifted clothes, and small sacrifices no one had ever noticed except me. When I stepped onto the cabin's creaking deck for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. Something unclench. I didn't tell Nathan. Not because I wanted to deceive him, but because I knew how the Hales would react to anything that didn't revolve around them. And I was right. When Nathan accidentally discovered the cabin because he ran my credit during a car loan application, the explosion was immediate. He confronted me with the disbelief of someone who considered my financial choices a threat to his authority. "You bought property without telling me?" he'd shouted. "With what money? Our money? Our?" I had repeated, stunned. "Nathan, it didn't affect our accounts at all." He didn't believe me. Or maybe he didn't care. Within hours, his parents arrived like an emergency response team. They positioned themselves in our living room like a tribunal. Diane perched straight-backed on the sofa, her pearls catching the light. Gerald stood with hands clasped behind him, the posture of a man about to fire someone. "What kind of wife hides a major purchase?" Diane asked, voice dripping with false concern. "Emily," Gerald said gravely, "this raises questions about your judgment." They attacked my character with the ease of people who genuinely believed they had the right. I realized then, in their minds, my accomplishments weren't evidence of competence. They were inconveniences, threats, challenges to the Hale family hierarchy. Still, I stayed. I tried. I swallowed the humiliation, and on Fridays, I drove to the cabin, sat on the deck, and let the silence knit me back together. That little place became my sanctuary, my rebellion, my proof that my life could exist outside the Hale ecosystem. But the shift in year 4 changed everything. My salary climbed. I started leading high-level audits. My work became respected in circles far outside the Hales' limited worldview. And that was when Nathan began to resent me. The resentment wasn't loud at first. It came in small, corrosive moments, tiny enough to deny, sharp enough to feel. When I received my promotion in year 4, a 30% raise, a corner office, my name etched on the frosted glass, Nathan didn't congratulate me. He didn't even look up from his phone. "It's about time you started contributing more," he'd muttered, scrolling through fantasy football updates. 2 days later, Tyler scratched off a $50 winning lottery ticket at Sunday dinner, and the entire Hale family reacted like he'd solved world hunger. Diane insisted on taking pictures. Gerald proposed a toast to Tyler's financial acumen. Nathan laughed until he teared up. My promotion? Barely a footnote. The imbalance grew so gradually that some part of me wondered if I'd started imagining it. But the evidence piled up. Gerald refused to discuss financial decisions with me, even though I built forecasting models for corporate clients. Nathan insisted on referring to his money and our money, despite the numbers telling a different story. Diane asked me to cook for every family event, then criticized the seasoning with an almost ritualistic precision. And every time I said, no, I can't cater a 12-person dinner on 24 hours' notice. No, we can't loan Tyler another $2,000 for his entrepreneurial venture, the label returned. Selfish, cold, ungrateful. Year 5 should have been my turning point, but I didn't recognize it as one until much later. I'd landed a $1 million contract for my firm, a milestone that took 18 months of 70-hour weeks, endless travel, and sheer determination. That night at dinner, I told the family, hoping stupidly that this achievement might shift something. "That's nice, dear," Diane had said, already turning. "Nathan, tell us about that deal you mentioned last week." His deal had been worth less than my monthly commission, and yet the Hales dissected it like a major economic event. That night, I drove home and sat in our driveway for 10 full minutes, unable to make myself walk inside. The porch light flickered. The kitchen window glowed. Nathan was already inside, microwaving leftovers I'd cooked. I remember thinking, if I disappeared right now, how long would it take him to notice? The answer, I suspected, was measured in days, not hours. The cabin became the only place where I felt like a full human being. I fixed cabinet hinges, patched drywall, painted window frames. I learned to replace a leaky faucet using YouTube videos. I planted tomatoes on the deck. Every small repair felt like reclaiming oxygen. But Nathan couldn't stand that I had something he couldn't control. His resentment sharpened when he noticed how often I went. He accused me of keeping secrets, of being dramatic, of pulling away. The worst part? He never asked why. Then, year 6 arrived, the year everything detonated. Apex Orion selected me for a 4-month international assignment based on my security clearance and technical expertise. The decision wasn't political or preferential. It was purely merit. Nathan's first reaction wasn't pride. It was suspicion. Why would they send a woman alone? He'd asked, as if the year were 1952. Diane called 30 minutes later, horrified. You're abandoning your marriage for a job? Emily, dear, career women always pay the price eventually. During my security briefing for the assignment, I learned about something that would later become crucial. Agent Melissa Tran explained that my cabin's location near a buried communications relay meant it was logged in classified systems as a restricted critical asset. It sounded dramatic, but in practice, it only meant the property required certain documentation if transferred or sold. I remember Melissa folding her hands and saying, "Anything involving this asset outside approved channels will be flagged. Automatically. Just be mindful." I had nodded, unaware that this line, this simple warning, would one day unravel the Hale family's entire world. Before I left for Singapore, I prepared everything meticulously. Automated bills, a property management company for the cabin, cloud-linked security cameras. Emergency-only instructions for Nathan that he never even glanced at. "You're overthinking it," he'd said, flipping through the pages with a smirk. "It's just a cabin, Emily, not Fort Knox." But while I was overseas working 16-hour days, building an international audit framework that would save Apex Orion millions, Nathan was busy losing control of the financial mess he'd built behind my back. Investment deals he'd kept secret from me cratered. Tyler's side ventures failed spectacularly. Short-term loans came due faster than expected. Nathan needed money fast. And the cabin? In his mind, it was the easiest, cleanest solution. While I was in a hotel room overlooking Marina Bay, sipping instant coffee at 5 a.m., before another marathon audit session, Nathan was cracking open my home office safe. He practiced my signature using the journals I'd kept at the cabin. He faked document dates. He forged authorization forms he didn't know were tied to federal databases. He thought he was being clever, resourceful, manly. What he actually did was light the fuse that would blow his life apart. And the stupidest part? If he had asked me just asked, I wouldn't have given him the cabin, but I might have helped him find a way out. I didn't know any of this yet when the Hale family planned a welcome home dinner to celebrate my return. But I felt it. I felt the shift, the strangeness, the darkness underneath their excitement. And by the time I stepped off the plane back home exhausted, hopeful, unaware, I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, federal agents would walk straight into Diane Hale's perfect dining room. Or that Nathan's smile that night was the smile of a man who believed he'd finally beaten me. He had no idea the system he'd underestimated was already coming for him. The moment everything crystallized for me wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet. So quiet it felt like the world stopped holding its breath. It happened the first time I visited the cabin with Eleanor Price. She'd walked me through the pine-shaded clearing, sunlight flickering between branches like slow-moving lanterns. When we stepped onto the porch, she touched the railing with a kind of reverence and said, "There are forests that only open themselves to people who truly need them." Something in me unlocked at those words. For the first time in years, I felt seen without having to perform to earn it. That was the beginning of my awakening. But the decision, the true pivot, came months later, in a small briefing room at Apex Orion headquarters, 3 days before I flew overseas. Agent Melissa Tran stood across from me, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp behind rectangular frames. "Your cabin sits near a communication relay tied to secured federal channels," she explained. "Because of your clearance, it's flagged as a restricted critical asset. Any transfer outside authorized protocol will be treated as suspicious activity." Suspicious activity. Flagged. Automatic escalation. The word slipped under my skin and stayed there. That was when I understood. I had been playing defense for years in a game where everyone else, the Hales, the expectations, the entitlement played offense without shame. I walked out of that meeting and made a promise to myself. From now on, I document everything, every transaction, every request, every irregularity. I opened a separate account, encrypted a digital log, forwarded emails to myself as evidence, built spreadsheets tracking financial patterns that didn't add up, not to trap Nathan, to protect myself. When the FBI texted me, "Maintain normal behavior the night of the dinner," I knew exactly what that meant. My loyalty was no longer to the Hale family, not even to the marriage I had tried so hard to salvage. My loyalty was to the truth that would stand long after their version of me collapsed. Progress never arrives like a sunrise. It comes in increments, small shifts, subtle breaths, quiet victories no one else sees. When I landed in Singapore for the Apex Orion assignment, I thought the distance would crush me. I imagined missing home, missing Nathan, missing the version of myself who still believed I had a marriage worth fighting for. But what hit me instead was silence. Pure, breathable, unmonitored silence. The hotel they placed me in overlooked Marina Bay. At night, the skyline mirrored itself in the water like a second city made of light. The first morning, I woke to the sound of my own breathing and realized it had been years since I had woken without dread. I began structuring my days with military precision. 5:45 a.m. gym. 7. A quick breakfast downstairs. 7:30 review compliance reports. Annotate red flags. 9. 2 evening on-site audits, briefings, interviews, strategy sessions. That first week, I rediscovered something I hadn't felt since before marrying into the Hale family. Competence. Quiet, solid, unshakable competence. There was no Diane leaning over my shoulder. No Gerald telling Nathan how proud he was of him. No Nathan himself making a joke at my expense. There were only facts, numbers, systems, and expertise. And me. Just me. In the evenings, while other team members went out for drinks, I stayed in my room and studied financial abuse case studies, legal frameworks for spousal rights, the psychology of coercive control. At first, I did it academically. Then I started recognizing patterns, phrases I had heard, behaviors I had normalized, accusations Nathan had recycled for years. By week 2, I stopped thinking of myself as someone enduring a marriage. I started thinking of myself as someone preparing an exit plan. The cabin appeared constantly in my mind, like a tether. While living out of a suitcase in Singapore, I remembered how I'd taught myself to repair a sagging cabinet hinge using nothing but a $6 hardware store kit. Or how I'd bandaged a small cut on my knuckle after replacing a broken tile near the fireplace. The way the morning light filled the loft bedroom. The smell of pine needles warmed by the sun. Those memories didn't ache. They steadied me. Before the Hale family destroyed the cabin's peace with their judgment, it had been a place where I had learned something crucial. Self-sufficiency. I'd built bookshelves there, crooked but functional. I'd installed a cheap desk by the window and spent hours writing in my journal, trying to articulate the pieces of myself I still recognized. I'd come to understand the power of claiming a space that no one else could define for me. That cabin wasn't my rebellion. It was my rehearsal. Week 3 in Singapore changed everything. Apex Orion's director, Michael Grant, began joining our audit briefings. He wasn't the cold executive I'd expected. He was precise, observant, and carried a tired sadness behind his calm exterior. One evening, he asked to speak with me privately after a 12-hour workday. I braced myself for criticism. Instead, he closed the conference room door, leaned against the table, and said, "You're carrying too much weight in your shoulders." I blinked. "Sir? You do excellent work," he continued lightly, "but you move like someone waiting to be punished for mistakes you haven't made yet." Something cracked inside me. He didn't know the details, but he wasn't wrong. I'd been bracing for impact since the day I married Nathan Hale. Michael didn't press. Instead, he shared something I hadn't expected. A short, clipped confession about his own past. A financially abusive partner. A marriage that drained him emotionally and professionally. A long, difficult disentanglement. And then he said, "You don't have to be noble in private to be effective in public." The words lodged in my chest. I spent the next several weeks auditing by day and rebuilding myself by night. My workouts became harder, more intentional. I added running on the Marina Bay Trail. My legs burned, lungs screamed, but I felt alive in a way that no Hale dinner had ever made me feel. My reflection changed too. Not dramatically, not instantly, but I started recognizing the woman looking back at me. Strength in her posture, clarity in her eyes, less apologetic space between her breaths. By the time month 2 arrived, I had stopped reaching for my phone, hoping Nathan would check in. Our calls had already shrunk to 5-minute snippets every few days, him distracted, me exhausted. At first, it hurt. Then it irritated me. Then, it stopped mattering. The Hale family group chat removed me somewhere in the middle of my 3rd month. No explanation, no accidental tap. Just gone. Nathan claimed it was a glitch. But then his social media told a different story. Photos appeared from Sunday dinners, Nathan seated between Diane and Gerald, Tyler cracking jokes, Kelsey smiling too brightly in a seat that was unmistakably mine. The captions made it worse. Finally, the whole family together. A perfect night with my people. My people. Something inside me solidified a quiet, immovable block of ice. I checked the cabin cameras that night. A deer walked through the yard. Pine branches swayed gently. Everything looked untouched but not safe. A week earlier, I had noticed a strange blip, lights flicking on in the cabin for exactly 15 minutes, then shutting off. The property management company reported no scheduled visit, and when I zoomed in on the footage, I saw what I'd hoped was a glitch. A shadow moving, briefly, purposefully. Nathan, of course it was him, looking for documents, hunting for leverage, maybe even practicing the signatures he'd later brag about forging. That realization didn't break me. It prepared me. By month 3, my progress became a montage of small, stubborn victories. I learned to say no during team meetings without explaining myself afterward. I slept without nightmares. I ate when I was hungry, not at designated Hale family meal times. I ran longer distances, lifted heavier weights, wrote firmer words in my journal. And each night, as I sat by the hotel window looking over the glowing city, I drafted versions of my own freedom. A new financial framework. A log of every suspicious transaction Nathan had made. Copies of every account detail he shouldn't have accessed. Email chains. Photos. Screenshots. Timelines. Not revenge. Preparation. The kind a woman builds quietly after realizing she has spent years being outnumbered. Agent Melissa Tran's words return to me often. The system is designed to protect people like you if you allow it to. I was learning to allow it. But reclamation isn't just building strength. It's confronting weakness. The night Nathan sent a photo of a Hale family dinner, him smiling, Kelsey's hand resting near his shoulder, I felt anger rise like a sharp, bright flame. For 5 seconds, I let myself imagine deleting the picture, blocking his number, calling Diane, and telling her everything Nathan had hidden. But then, I opened the cabin camera feed. Moonlight floated across the pond. Wind rustled through the pines. The deck, my deck, looked steady and patient. The flame inside me didn't vanish. It transformed, from fury to resolve, from hurt to clarity, from endurance to strategy. That night, I wrote in my journal, I am no longer surviving this marriage. I am outgrowing it. And for the first time, I believed it. Progress didn't make me fearless. It made me honest with myself. By the time month 4 approached, I had stopped lying to myself about the Hales, about Nathan, about what my life looked like from the outside. I had built a version of myself that ran on autopilot for years, efficient, agreeable, always smoothing over problems. Singapore broke that version apart, piece by piece, until what was left was something sharper, sturdier, less willing to settle for half-light. One night, after a brutal 14-hour audit session in which we uncovered a chain of compliance breaches stretching back 8 years, I found myself sitting at the edge of the hotel pool at midnight. I dipped my feet into the water, watching ripples distort the reflection of the skyscrapers overhead. I felt exhaustion pulling at my bones, but beneath it, there was another sensation, one I couldn't name at first. Relief. Not because the work was done. It wasn't. Not because my marriage was fixed. It wasn't. But because for the first time in years, I was living a life that was undeniably mine. A group of colleagues walked past me, laughing loudly. One of them called out, "Emily, come join us." They meant well, but I shook my head with a small smile. "I'm good," I said. And I was. Progress wasn't linear. There were setbacks, quiet ones, sharp ones. Like the morning I woke up to a text from Nathan. "We need to talk. Something feels off between us." A part of me reacted out of old habit, panic, guilt, the immediate urge to fix whatever he claimed was broken. But the new part of me, the part forged in the silence of Silverwood Ridge and the neon glow of Singapore nights, simply stared at the message until my heartbeat slowed. I typed, "We can talk when I'm home." Then I turned my phone face down and went to the gym. Later that week, Diane emailed me a link to an article titled "Women Who Choose Career Over Family Regret It in the End." Her message said, "Just something to consider, dear. We all make choices." Past me would have reread the email 3 times, crafting a polite reply. New me archived it without opening it again. The Hale family's attempts to guilt me no longer reached the part of me that mattered. But there was one thing that did reach me, something that kept me anchored, even as Nathan's distance grew colder and Diane's judgment grew louder. The cabin. Even from halfway across the world, it felt like a heartbeat. Every morning before breakfast, I checked the security feed. The dock, the tree line, the porch steps. I watched fog drift across the pond, saw sunlight slice through the pines, sometimes caught a fox trotting along the path. Those little scenes reminded me that a version of life existed where I wasn't constantly shrinking myself to fit into someone else's narrative. Then, one night, the feed flickered. For 15 minutes, the living room lights glowed. No scheduled maintenance, no weather interference. And then, the lights clicked off abruptly. I replayed the footage a dozen times. A shadow moved in the corner of one frame, tall, deliberate, familiar in a way that made my stomach drop. Nathan. There was no proof. But intuition can be louder than evidence. He had been in my cabin. He had accessed something he shouldn't have. And in the back of my mind, Agent Melissa's briefing echoed like a warning bell. Any unauthorized activity around a restricted critical asset is automatically logged. I didn't report it. Not yet. But I documented everything: timestamps, screenshots, observations. This time, I wasn't going to walk into a disaster unprepared. My relationship with Michael Grant shifted subtly in those final weeks. Not romantically, he was far too professional for that. And I was still married, even if only on paper. But his presence became something steady in a storm. He checked in on my workload. Not hovering, not micromanaging, simply observing. He had a talent for reading people without prying, for offering support without demanding vulnerability. One evening, after an exhausting debrief with the legal team, he paused before leaving the room. "You know," he said, "there's strength in walking away before the house collapses on you." I didn't answer, because if I spoke, the truth inside me might spill out too fast. But his words stayed with me long after I boarded the plane home. The flight back to the States was 16 hours of turbulence, external and internal. I tried to sleep, but Nathan's silence gnawed at me in strange ways. His last text before my departure had been curt. "Don't forget Sunday dinner. Mom wants it to be special." Special. That word clung to me like static electricity. When the plane finally descended, my phone buzzed with a new message. "Come straight to my parents' house." No greeting, no offer to pick me up, no acknowledgement that I'd been gone 4 months. The coldness of it didn't sting. It clarified. The Hales didn't miss me. They missed the labor I provided, the cooking, the smoothing over, the silent compliance. Still, I followed instructions, partly because I needed to see what Nathan was hiding, partly because the FBI had not yet entered the narrative, but something inside me sensed they would. I arrived home before going to the Hale house, dragging my suitcase behind me like an anchor. That's when I saw it. Strange cars in the driveway, a leather sectional replacing our old sofa, artwork I'd never seen, a bottle of unfamiliar perfume on my dresser. My clothes shoved to one side, another woman's things filling the empty spaces. But the shock didn't overwhelm me. It steadied me. It confirmed what I had felt for months, that my marriage was no longer a shared life, but a narrative Nathan edited without my consent. And in that moment, my reclamation became absolute. The drive to the Hale house felt like traveling toward a storm I had already accepted. I walked in through the unlocked front door, heart steady, breath even. Voices floated from the dining room, laughter, clinking glasses, celebration. For what? I didn't know yet. But as I rounded the corner and saw the dinner set up, Diane's best crystal, the expensive catered food, the smug energy vibrating off Nathan's shoulders, I knew something enormous had shifted. Tyler smirked when he saw me. Kelsey avoided my eyes. Diane beamed with a triumph I didn't yet understand. Then Nathan tapped his fork against the crystal glass. The sound was sharp, metallic, final. That was the moment my progress and reclamation collided with the storm. Everything I'd built, the strength, the silence, the clarity, would be tested in the next seconds. I didn't know then that federal agents were already on their way. I didn't know the FBI had been watching the cabin's transfer logs for weeks. I didn't know that the warning text from the anonymous number had been the first domino. All I knew was this: I was no longer the woman who sat quietly while the Hales dismissed her. I was the woman who had rebuilt herself, and I was ready for whatever truth was about to detonate across that perfect dining table. Complications don't arrive as single events. They slither in, layered, overlapping, disguised as concern or coincidence, until suddenly you're surrounded and every breath becomes a negotiation. Mine began the moment I stepped back into daily life stateside, where the distance I'd built in Singapore began colliding with the mess Nathan had created behind my back. 3 days before the Hale dinner, he finally called. Not to pick me up from the airport, not to ask about my assignment, just to say, "We should talk when you're back. Things feel off. As if our marriage was a thermostat he could tap until the temperature returned to normal. As if he hadn't been the one fading out of our calls, canceling our scheduled video chats, and posting photos from Sunday dinners like a man who had already replaced his wife with a curated family portrait. I didn't respond immediately. I let the message sit unread for an hour while I unpacked, showered, and stared at myself in the mirror, hair still damp, eyes sharper than the woman who'd left 4 months earlier. When I finally replied, my answer was simple: "We'll talk Sunday." But Sunday wasn't a conversation. It was an ambush wrapped in linen napkins and catered entrees. The first complication came disguised as softness. Nathan shifted tactics the week before I flew home. He started sending small, almost tender gestures. Photos of meals he claimed to have cooked, snapshots of the backyard at sunset, a picture of the cat napping on the couch. "You're missing these moments," he wrote. There had been no cat before I left. The Hale family despised pets. I realized later the cat wasn't for me. It was to make the house look full online, to make it look like someone else already lived there. Still, for a moment, the old version of me, the one conditioned to accommodate, felt a flicker of guilt. A whisper, maybe he's trying now, maybe I'm the one pulling away. But then the next photo came. Nathan at Sunday dinner. Empty chair beside him. Kelsey leaning slightly toward him. Tyler captioning it, "Family night, missing no one this time." No one. Me. The softness evaporated. The second complication was Diane. She didn't call. She emailed. And Diane's emails were always more dangerous than her voice. Polished, weaponized, dripping with polite venom. Her subject line read, "A thought for a wife who wants to have it all." Inside was a link to an article about career-driven women losing their families, followed by her message, "We worry about you, dear. Ambition is admirable, but balance is a virtue. Don't let distance harden you." Harden me? I closed the email without responding. The only thing hardening was my resolve. But complications rarely stop at the people you expect. The third came from the cabin. One night, while reviewing audit documentation in my hotel room, I opened the cabin's live feed out of habit. The porch was dark. The lake reflected a crescent moon. Everything seemed still. Then, a flicker. The living room lights snapped on, held for 15 minutes, snapped off. The management company hadn't scheduled anyone. No weather interference. No wildlife could trigger that specific switch. I watched the playback frame by frame. Movement in the shadows. A shape crossing the window. An arm. A shoulder. Deliberate steps. Nathan. He'd been inside my sanctuary. Inside the one place he'd always resented because it didn't belong to him. Inside the cabin tied to federal security systems he didn't even know existed. That knowledge sat in my chest like a stone, dense and cold. I noted the timestamp, saved the clip, filed it. Not fear, not panic, just preparation. The fourth complication was internal, a betrayal by my own heart. The week before the dinner, Nathan posted another photo. Him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, laughing at something just off camera. And there she was, Kelsey leaning into the frame, holding a whisk, flour on her cheek. They looked like a couple from a weekend cooking show, casual and comfortable, and far too familiar. For a split second, my vision blurred. Not because I still loved him, but because I realized he had replaced the fantasy of our marriage long before I'd stopped trying. Pain rose first, sharp, quick, humiliating. Then, anger. Then something quieter, more honest. He was never mine to lose. I closed the photo, opened the cabin feed, watched pine shadows move across the deck, and exhaled. The ache didn't disappear, but it found perspective. The fifth complication came from outside my marriage entirely. Work. Apex Orion's legal department requested an additional audit, one tied indirectly to my assignment. That meant extra hours, new travel arrangements, late-night calls. Michael Grant stopped by my desk one evening and said quietly, "You're carrying more than your share again. Don't forget you're allowed to set boundaries." His tone wasn't paternal or flirtatious. It was understanding. And understanding is dangerous when you've spent 6 years being dismissed. It made me feel seen. And that was complication enough. But the most difficult complication, the one that tested every ounce of progress I'd made, arrived the night of the dinner itself. Nathan wasn't gloating yet. He wasn't triumphant yet. First, he was charming, warm, almost gentle. He greeted me with a smile that looked practiced, offered me a glass of wine, asked about my trip with a sincerity that would have fooled anyone who didn't know him as intimately as I once had. Tyler joked. Diane fussed. Gerald nodded in authoritative approval. And beneath their politeness, I felt the shift. They were too cheerful, too celebratory, too anticipatory. A stage set for a performance I hadn't been told about. My skin prickled. I knew something was coming. I didn't know Nathan would brag about forging my signature. I didn't know he'd sold the cabin. I didn't know the federal government had already flagged the unauthorized transfer. But I felt the danger humming in the air, the way a storm vibrates before it breaks. When Agent Dana Cole texted me, 15 minutes. Whatever happens, don't warn them. My pulse didn't spike. I simply folded the phone into my lap, breathed slowly, and prepared. Because complications weren't circling me anymore. They were circling them. And all I had to do was stay still long enough for the truth to land. Complications don't soften when the climax approaches. They sharpen, becoming blades that test exactly where you still bleed. By the time I sat down at the Hale dining table that night, every instinct I possessed was humming like an exposed wire. Diane's best crystal glittered under the chandelier. The catered dishes smelled rich and heavy. Tyler was already half drunk, laughing too loudly. Kelsey looked beautiful in a soft blue dress, too beautiful, too comfortable in a house that wasn't hers. Nathan took the seat at the head of the table, not beside me. A choice that said more than words ever could. He poured himself wine, swirling it like a man rehearsing for an audience. And the room, his family, the decorations, the perfectly plated food felt like a stage he had built to celebrate himself. Complication number 1. Nathan had never been this confident. Not with me, not with anyone. Confidence meant he believed he'd already won something. The second complication arrived in the form of a joke from Tyler. As the servers cleared the first course, he nudged Nathan and said, "Man, I still can't believe you pulled that off. Legendary." Nathan grinned, pleased with himself, and Diane shot me a strange, almost pitying smile like she already knew I was about to be blindsided. My shoulders tightened. Pulled what off? But before I could question it, Nathan launched into a story about reorganizing our finances while I was gone. The way he explained it sounded almost noble, almost responsible if you didn't know how he'd once drained our joint account to fund Tyler's doomed crypto import-export business. He dropped small hints, breadcrumbs of self-flattery. Sometimes you've got to make executive decisions. It's all about taking initiative. Emily's always been too busy, someone had to handle things. Each sentence felt like a hand closing around my throat. He was preparing the speech, the reveal, the humiliation. And I had to sit there, stone still, pretending nothing was coming because the FBI had asked me to. The third complication unfolded when Diane lifted her glass. "To Nathan," she said proudly, "for stepping up while Emily was away." "Stepping up?" Every nerve in my body lit up. Gerald added, "A man's role is to lead his household, You did what needed to be done, son. Kelsey's expression flickered admiration mixed with something I couldn't yet name. Maybe guilt. Maybe excitement. Maybe ignorance. Nathan had built himself a cheer squad. Whatever he was about to announce, it was something he wanted praised. Something he expected praised. And that made it dangerous. The fourth complication hit me harder than expected. Nathan reached into a leather folder beside his chair, the same kind used by bankers and real estate agents, and placed it on the table. Documents. Stacks of them. He tapped the cover with 2 fingers, smiling, waiting for silence. In the dead quiet that followed, he glanced at me with an expression I recognized perfectly. The look of a man who believed he'd outsmarted the woman sitting beside him. That look used to break me. Now, it only clarified things. I had married a man who valued the performance of power more than he valued truth, and he was about to prove it. The fifth complication was internal. I had to sit still while he bragged about betraying me. I felt the phone in my lap vibrate. Agent Dana's final message. We're 10 minutes out. Keep them unaware. My throat tightened. Nathan cleared his throat, raised his glass, tapped it against Diane's crystal. And then it began. I've made a significant financial move for the family, he announced. A smart one. Everyone leaned in. He went on. You all know Emily's little cabin in Silverwood Ridge, her tiny hideaway she bought 3 years ago. Tiny. Hideaway. Said like I was a child hoarding trinkets. My silence tasted metallic. Well, Nathan continued, I finally did something about it. I sold it last month for $60,000. Gasps. Cheers. Diane clapped a hand over her heart. Gerald grinned. Tyler whistled. Kelsey's mouth fell open, but something uncertain flickered in her eyes. Nathan pointed around the table proudly. This entire dinner? Paid for from the sale. At least Emily contributed 1 meal this year. Laughter roared. Except from me. The sixth complication? The one no one else saw? Every Hale at that table looked at Nathan with admiration. Not a single one looked to me for my reaction. Not one. I was invisible again, just as they preferred. The seventh complication was brutal. Nathan opened the leather folder and spread out the forged documents like trophies. My signature, reproduced dozens of times. Dates altered. Authorization stamps faked. He spoke like he was giving a master class. Took 3 days of practice, he said proudly. Used Emily's journals. Copied her handwriting. Nailed the pressure on the V and the slope on the L. Diane murmured, resourceful. Gerald nodded in approval. Tyler laughed. Kelsey looked down, her fingers tensing. My heart didn't race. My vision didn't blur. I had trained myself for this. I had built the muscle of stillness. But inside, something cold and ancient unfurled the part of me that had been silent too long. The eighth complication was perfectly timed. My phone vibrated again. Unfamiliar number. Second call. I excused myself with a calmness so precise it felt choreographed. Out on the Hale back porch, I answered. Logan Pierce. Voice trembling. Miss. Lane wire federal agents in my office. They're tearing apart my files. They're asking about restricted property transfers. They want documents signed under your name. What happened? Access. My fingers dug into the phone. They had arrived sooner than expected. When I stepped back inside, Nathan was still basking in the applause. His family hovered over the documents, praising his brilliance, his initiative, his leadership. None of them knew the FBI cars were already the next street over. That was the ninth complication. The Hales still believed they were untouchable. And the final complication, the 10th, was the worst of all. I had to sit back down at that table. Pick up my fork. Pretend nothing was happening. Pretend my world wasn't shifting beneath us like a plate cracking in slow motion. Nathan smirked at me as I returned, whispering, You should thank me. I met his eyes. And for the first time in our marriage, I felt nothing. Not love. Not anger. Not fear. Just readiness. Because complications are only problems when you're unprepared. And I wasn't unprepared anymore. The moment right before a storm breaks is never silent. It's taut, like a wire stretched between 2 trembling poles. That was the air inside the Hale dining room the night everything detonated, and I felt it before anyone else. I sat in my chair with my hands folded neatly in my lap, my phone screen dimmed, Agent Dana Cole's last text still burning beneath it like a hidden fuse. We're close. Keep them occupied. Don't tip them off. 10 minutes, she'd said. But the hum in my spine told me she was closer. Across the table, Nathan basked in his family's praise like a king returning from war. He had just finished explaining to wild applause how he'd forged my signatures, falsified the transfer paperwork, and pocketed $60,000 from the sale of my cabin, acting as though he had rescued the family from some fabricated financial hardship. He had no idea the storm was already walking toward this house in tactical boots. Diane dabbed the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin, eyes shining with pride. "Nathan, sweetheart, you've always had such an entrepreneurial mind." Gerald clapped him on the back. "This is what leadership looks like." Tyler raised his whiskey glass. "Honestly, bro, you're a legend for this. Emily should be thanking you instead of looking like—" He waved a hand at me. That, apparently, meant calm. Too calm. Kelsey stared at the forged documents still splayed across the table, her fingers tightening around her wine stem. She hadn't said a word since Nathan's big reveal. I caught her glance once, quick, guilty, uncertain. She wasn't proud of what she had just witnessed. She was frightened. Good. Some people need fear before they can recognize truth. "What's wrong with you?" Nathan asked me suddenly, leaning back in his chair like a man too self-satisfied to see the edge beneath him. "You haven't said anything in 20 minutes. Because I was listening, and documenting, and waiting. It's been a long trip," I answered quietly. Diane tutted. "Long trip or not, dear, a wife should at least pretend to be supportive. Nathan has done an enormous service for this family." I turned my head slowly, meeting her eyes without flinching. "Has he?" Something in my tone made her sit straighter. Something in my gaze made her look away. Nathan chuckled, thinking I was embarrassed. "Look, I get it, you're shocked. But you'll thank me later. That cabin was a burden anyway. You barely used it." My fingertips brushed the side of my phone beneath the table, as if reassuring myself the world outside this room still existed. "That cabin was mine," I said evenly. "Was," Nathan corrected. "I took care of it. You should be grateful." The room went still. Gerald frowned. "Why are you making this difficult, Emily?" Nathan made a responsible financial call. "Sometimes leadership requires stepping on toes." "My toes," I said softly. Diane sniffed. "Don't make this dramatic. You weren't even here. Nathan handled things because you abandoned your responsibilities." "Abandoned?" A laugh almost escaped me. The irony was a flavor so bitter it tasted sweet. But the storm wasn't here yet. I had to keep them talking. So I leaned back in my chair and asked the simplest, most lethal question. "Nathan, how exactly did you learn to copy my signature?" He grinned, delighted to brag. "Your journals? The ones you left at the cabin? I found them during one of my visits." My stomach turned not from fear, but from confirmation. Nathan had been inside the cabin during the unexplained lights-on incident. He'd rifled through my things. He'd used the journal I had filled with private thoughts to commit a federal crime. "And the witnesses on the paperwork?" I asked mildly. "The notary? The authorization code?" Nathan tapped the side of his head. "I know people. A friend at the bank owed me a favor. It's not complicated if you know how to work the system." If only he understood which system he'd tripped. If only he grasped how badly he'd miscalculated. But ignorance is loud, and Nathan Hale was screaming. Diane lifted her glass again. "Tonight is about celebrating, not interrogation." Nathan did what any good husband would do. "A good husband," I repeated, the phrase tasting foreign. Tyler shoved another document toward me. "Look, sis, here's the deed with your signature. Looks legit, right?" Nate spent hours practicing. It's kind of impressive, honestly. The table laughed again. This time, even Kelsey didn't join in. She stared down at her lap, twisting her napkin with increasing agitation. Then, with a shaky voice, she said, "Nathan, you didn't actually forge everything, did you?" Nathan snorted. "Relax, Kels. Everyone does it when they need to handle business." "No," she said, swallowing. "They don't." Diane's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Kelsey whispered, "this is illegal." Gerald scoffed. "Young lady, you don't know anything about how real estate transactions work." Kelsey flinched. Nathan rolled his eyes. Tyler muttered something rude under his breath. But the moment cracked something open. The room wasn't united anymore. The veneer of celebration had thinned. Fear seeped in through the fault lines. And I felt the storm get closer. My phone buzzed again. One buzz short, Concise, coded, they're here. I exhaled quietly, steadying myself for the impact. Emily, Nathan said loudly, lifting his wine glass. I know this is a surprise, but I want you to see this as a turning point. A fresh start for us. A fresh start. He had no idea how correct he was. Gerald raised his voice. A toast, then, to Nathan's leadership and good judgment. Glasses clinked. I didn't lift mine, Nathan noticed. Emily, he said sharply. Pick up the glass. I met his gaze. Calm, cold. No. The room sucked in a collective breath. Nathan's jaw flexed. Don't start this right now. This? I asked. You mean reacting to you selling my property? Forging my signature? Breaking federal law? Tyler groaned. Jesus, Em, stop being dramatic. Dramatic? My voice remained gentle. You think this is drama? Nathan slammed his hand against the table. Enough. You owe this family some foo. Bang, bang, bang. 3 hard knocks shook the front door, authoritative, synchronized, unmistakable. Diane jolted. Gerald froze mid-sentence. Tyler nearly spilled his whiskey. Kelsey dropped her fork. Only Nathan seemed confused. Who the hell? He didn't finish. A voice boomed from beyond the door. Federal agents, open up now. Silence fell like a guillotine. Diane stood, trembling. Nathan, what does this mean? Why are they here? Nathan looked at me. For the first time all night, real fear flashed in his eyes. I held his gaze and said nothing. Bang, bang, bang. Open the door. Gerald hobbled toward the entryway, voice shaking. There must be some misunderstanding. The lock clicked, the hinges groaned, and the storm walked in. 5 agents entered the dining room with clipped precision, flashlights sweeping briefly across walls, badges visible, voices calm but commanding. At their center was Agent Dana Cole, dark blazer, controlled stride, expression razor sharp. She assessed the room in a single glance, then fixed her attention on Nathan. Nathan Hale, she said. Stand up. He didn't move, couldn't move. What is this? Diane whispered. Why are you talking to my son? Agent Cole's voice didn't waver. You are under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, and federal conspiracy involving the unauthorized transfer of a restricted critical asset. The room imploded. Diane screamed. Gerald sputtered. Tyler cursed. Kelsey burst into tears. And Nathan gaped at me as if I had personally summoned the apocalypse. Emily, he gasped. Tell them it's a mistake. The cabin was ours. Agent Cole didn't even look at me yet. Her focus was on the criminal. Mr. Hale, she said, anything you say can and will be used against you. And considering you just described your crimes in detail on record, in front of multiple witnesses, we're off to a very strong start. A sound left Nathan a broken, disbelieving noise. This is your fault, he whispered to me. You brought them here. No, I replied softly. You did. The agents moved in, efficient and dispassionate. Cuffs clicked around his wrists. He started shouting about his rights, about misunderstandings, about me sabotaging the family. His parents rushed forward, but 2 agents stepped between them. Ma'am, sir, stand back. Tyler swayed, speechless for once. Kelsey covered her mouth with shaking hands. Diane clutched her pearls like a lifeline, eyes wild. Nathan struggled against the agents, shouting, Emily, say something. I folded my napkin neatly and placed it beside my untouched plate. Then I looked at him, the man who had stolen from me, lied about me, replaced me, forged me, and said the only truth he had ever earned. You sold something you never even tried to understand. His face twisted, and the agents pulled him toward the door. When the front door shut behind them, the silence left behind was colder than any winter. The storm had passed, but the ruins were just beginning. The door closed behind the agents with a final, echoing thud, one that seemed to vibrate through the walls, through the chandelier, through the blood in every Hale vein still sitting at that table. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Diane's voice cracked the silence like glass under pressure. What did you do? She hissed at me. Not at Nathan. Not at the son being dragged away in federal custody. Me. Her target had always been me. I stayed seated, hands folded on the tablecloth, my pulse steady, my spine tall. Diane, I said quietly. I didn't forge anything. I didn't sell anything. I didn't touch federal property. Your son did. She recoiled as if I had slapped her. Federal property? Gerald repeated, blinking in confusion. What federal property? The cabin was just a little getaway. A little getaway, I echoed, that sits adjacent to a confidential communications relay flagged under Apex Orion's security division. Blank stares, all except Kelsey. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with recognition not of the technical details, but of the danger. She had guessed pieces of this long before anyone else dared. Gerald's face reddened. That's absurd. Nathan wouldn't be involved in anything federal. He works at a bank, for God's sake. And… Exactly, I said, which gave him access he shouldn't have used. Diane's voice cracked, brittle as old wood. Stop lying. I finally stood, not abruptly, not dramatically, just stood, placing my palms lightly on the table, leaning in with the measured calm of someone who had nothing left to fear. I'm not lying, I said quietly. Your son committed felony fraud, on record, tonight, in front of all of you. Tyler sank slowly into his chair, face pale. Jesus, Nate really forged everything? He whispered it like a confession. Or a realization. Kelsey swallowed hard. He told me paperwork was easy if you knew people. I thought he meant, I don't know. She shook her head, tremors visible in her fingers. I didn't know he meant this. Diane rounded on her. You knew about this? You let my son walk into a trap? She didn't let him, I interjected. Nathan walked into the trap he built. Diane slapped her palm on the table. He would never do something illegal. My laugh came out soft, humorless. He forged my signature dozens of times. He used my journals to practice. He sold a restricted asset. He falsified witness statements. He lied to a federal system that flags anomalies automatically. Restricted what? Gerald barked. You're making this sound like espionage. It isn't espionage, I replied. It's pattern interference. And the FBI doesn't ignore pattern interference? Gerald sank into his chair, hands shaking. Diane's face transformed into something vicious. You planned this, she spat. You plotted to destroy him. You wanted this marriage to fail. My marriage failed the moment Nathan decided my boundaries were optional. You're punishing him because he sold your precious cabin. I met her stare evenly. No, Diane. I'm watching him face consequences because he broke federal law. The truth struck her like cold wind. But denial is sturdy in people who have built their identity around it. You wanted this, she whispered. You're vindictive. You always have been. You think you're better than this family. No, I used to think I wasn't enough for them. Now I realized they were never enough for me. Tyler suddenly slammed his empty glass onto the table. The sound fractured the tension, startling everyone. Everybody shut up, he said, voice cracking. We all knew Nate was doing shady crap. We let him. Every single one of us. Diane gasped. Tyler! No, Mom. His chest rose and fell sharply. We joked about it. We celebrated it. We encouraged it. Because Nate always acted like the hero who could get away with anything. His gaze slid to me. For once, there was no mockery in it. You tried to tell us. You tried more than once. We didn't listen. His voice broke then just for a second, but it was enough. Kelsey let out a small sob, covering her face with her hands. Gerald pushed himself to his feet slowly, unsteadily, gripping the edge of the table for support. Where did they take him? He asked hollowly. To the field office, I said. He'll be processed, questioned, and held pending arraignment. Diane clutched her chest. We have to get a lawyer. We have to… You will, I said. But no lawyer can unforge signatures. No lawyer can erase digital logs. And no lawyer can undo a restricted asset transfer authenticated through a federal monitoring system. She stared at me, hatred pouring from her like heat. You think you're so perfect, she whispered. So morally superior. No, I said softly. I think I learned to survive a family that blamed me for their son's choices. The chandelier flickered slightly overhead, making the crystal glow in fractured patterns on the table. The untouched food grew cold. The air thickened with panic, humiliation, and truths too heavy to swallow. But beneath it all, there was something else. The first faint tremor of collapse. Not mine. Theirs. Gerald sank back into his chair, massaging his temples. This is a misunderstanding. It has to be. It's evidence. I corrected. Diane pointed at me with a trembling hand. You called them. No, I replied calmly. Nathan's forged documents triggered a federal alert. The system called them. Liar. And for the Wakshan content for since. I was overseas when it triggered. Her mouth opened, closed. Anger waged war with reality. Nathan wouldn't be stupid enough to leave a trail. He wasn't stupid, I said. He was arrogant. There's a difference. Tyler let out a strangled laugh. Yeah, Nate always thought rules didn't apply to him. Kelsey's voice finally rose, breaking on the edges. He dragged me into some of it. I didn't understand what I was signing. I thought it was paperwork for the house party. I didn't know he was using my ID for loans. Diane turned white. You helped him commit fraud too? Kelsey's breath hitched. I didn't know, but Diane was already spiraling, crashing through layers of denial like glass floors above a cliff. This is your fault, she shouted at me again. You poisoned him. I didn't forge anything, I repeated. I didn't take anything. I didn't manipulate anyone. Your son did this. To himself, to me, to all of you. The room went silent again. A thick, suffocating quiet. Finally, Gerald broke it, voice trembling with fear not of me, but of the federal system he'd spent years pretending couldn't touch his family. What? What happens next? He asked. That depends, I said, on how much Nathan tells them. All three Hales stiffened at once, because for the first time, they realized they weren't collateral damage. They were potential accomplices. Tyler rubbed his face. Jesus, Em, you're saying if Nate drags us in, I'm saying, I interrupted gently, that you need to think very carefully about the choices you make in the next 24 hours. Kelsey whispered. He told me some things. About money, about accounts, about handling issues before you got back. Her eyes darted to Diane, then to me. I don't want to be involved in this, she said. I didn't sign up for this. She broke off, tears spilling. I wanted to feel anger toward her. I wanted to resent her for the way Nathan touched her shoulder in photos, the way she'd sat in my place at the Hale dinners, the way she had become the woman they preferred. But what I felt was something entirely different. Recognition. She, too, had been blindsided, used, pulled into Nathan's orbit by a force that disguised itself as charm. You can step away, I told her softly. Now, she looked at me as if I'd handed her the first piece of safety she'd been offered all year. Diane wasn't done. She rose slowly to her feet, trembling, fury etched into every line of her face. You ruined him, she whispered. My son is in federal custody because of you. I'm not responsible for Nathan's crimes. He did it for this family. No, I said steadily. He did it for himself. You only cheered. Her mouth opened in a soundless gasp. I continued, voice even. You taught him there were no consequences. You rewarded him for lying, for cutting corners, for taking what wasn't his. You told him he was brilliant no matter what he did, and he believed you. Her face crumpled. Gerald stared at the floor. Tyler let out a strangled exhale. Kelsey sobbed quietly. For the first time in 6 years, I saw the Hale family without masks. Not superior, not powerful, not judgmental, just small, frightened, and drowning in the aftermath of their own making. I stepped back from the table, smoothing my blouse. I'll be cooperating with the investigation, I said. Not against you, but for the truth. And what, Gerald asked hoarsely, is the truth? That Nathan crossed lines he thought he could erase, and that none of you stopped him. I walked toward the hallway, the floor creaking beneath my steps, the air heavy with shock. Just before reaching the doorway, I looked back one final time. Diane clutched her napkin like a lifeline. Gerald's shoulders sagged. Tyler stared at nothing. Kelsey wiped her tears with the back of her hand. The perfect Hale dinner had ended in ruins, but the night wasn't done. Not yet, because the truth had cracked open, and the aftershocks were still coming. The quiet after catastrophe is its own kind of violence. When the last federal vehicle's headlights cut across the front windows and disappeared down the street, leaving the Hale house in a suffocating stillness, the world didn't return to normal. It froze. The dining room felt embalmed, like the aftermath of a storm that had ripped the roof off but left the furniture untouched. The scent of roasted meat and Diane's eucalyptus centerpiece had turned nauseating. The crystal glasses were still half full, reflecting the chandelier's fractured light across the table like broken promises. And in the center of it all sat the leather folder of forged documents Nathan had displayed so proudly 20 minutes earlier. No one dared touch it. No one dared look away from it either. It was the smoking gun of a life they had built on denial. I stood in the archway, my hands loosely clasped, watching them like someone observing a distant planet fascinated by the gravity collapse, untouched by it. It was the first moment in 6 years that I felt completely, irrevocably separate from them, and free. Diane finally broke the silence. She rose unsteadily, gripping the back of her chair, her knuckles white, her voice shredded. This is your doing. Her tone was quieter now, not the shrill accusation she'd thrown earlier. It was a defeated, breathless whisper, the sound of a person clinging to the last piece of a reality that was slipping out of their hands. But even in that softness, the accusation lived. I stepped fully into the room. Diane, I said, Nathan forged my signature. Nathan sold something he didn't own. Nathan triggered a federal alert. Nathan bragged about it on camera. This. I gestured at the space where Agents Dana and her team had stood, was his doing. Gerald looked brittle. His voice, when it came, sounded older than his age. How long will he be held? That depends, I answered, on how cooperative he is. The implication landed. Diane inhaled sharply. Gerald flinched. Tyler, sitting hunched forward with his elbows on his knees, scrubbed both hands over his face. Hell, he whispered, voice cracking. He's gonna drag us all into this. Kelsey, who hadn't spoken in several minutes, lifted her head, and the devastation in her eyes was genuine, raw. I didn't know, she whispered. He told me I was helping him with reimbursements from the last Hale fundraiser. He said you didn't care about the cabin. He said you never went there. Her breath broke. He said you wouldn't notice. Her shame hit me surprisingly hard. Not because she deserved pity, she had been complicit, even if ignorant, but because she had believed Nathan's version of me, the same one the Hales had sculpted for years, dismissive, detached, too career-focused to notice my own life unraveling around me, a ghost of the woman they pretended I was. Not knowing doesn't make you guilty, I told her softly, but it doesn't make you innocent either. Now you know. Act accordingly. Her eyes flooded with tears. She nodded. Diane made a small choking sound. This family, she rasped, pointing a trembling finger at the table, at the folder, at the empty space where Nathan had stood, has been destroyed tonight. I didn't hesitate. No, I said. This family was destroyed long before I walked into this dining room. Tonight, you just finally saw the pieces. Her face contorted, not in anger, in something worse. Recognition. The collapse of denial is never clean. It comes in shards. For a while, no one spoke. The air felt thick, almost tangible, like it might choke us if we inhaled too deeply. Then Tyler whispered, "Em, can I ask something?" His voice was hoarse, stripped of the usual teasing arrogance. I nodded. "Why didn't you tell me? Before tonight? I could have—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "You could have what?" I asked gently. "Stopped him? Or covered for him?" His shoulders slumped. I don't know." "Yes, you do," I said. "You've always known. All of you. You just didn't want the truth." He flinched like I'd struck him. Kelsey spoke next, timid. Is it really true? About the federal flag?" "Yes." "Because of Apex Orion?" "Yes. Because the cabin is near." "Kelsey," I said softly, stopping her before she revealed things she didn't understand. "You don't need to finish that sentence." She shut her mouth quickly. Good. She wasn't stupid. Gerald suddenly looked ill. My God. If he forged documents connected to that system. He did, I said. And there are recordings? There are always recordings, I replied, especially when someone confesses in front of multiple witnesses. Diane squeezed her eyes shut. He didn't confess. He was proud. That's still a confession. It's Goat Hanno to like the 6Ds. Her face crumpled into her hands. Gerald finally stood slowly, like the movement cost him. He walked to the table, staring down at the documents Nathan had displayed like victory banners. For a long moment, he simply looked at them. Then, with trembling hands, he reached for the top page. I stepped forward sharply. Don't. His hand froze. Why not? He asked, almost pleading. Because they're evidence. And tampering with evidence is a separate felony. The color drained from his face. He pulled his hand back as if the papers might burn him. He turned to me, eyes bloodshot, voice thin. What happens to us, to this family? This family, I said, survives however it chooses, but I'm not part of it. Diane's head snapped up. You're leaving? I left years ago, I replied softly. Tonight just made it official. She staggered, as though the foundation beneath her had shifted. But she didn't ask me to stay. She couldn't. Because even in her delusion, she understood that I had been slipping away piece by piece for years, hemorrhaging hope with every insult, every dismissal, every time she'd called me organized instead of capable, every time she'd made me invisible at her table. Tonight wasn't abandonment. It was closure. I moved around the table slowly, gathering my coat from the back of the chair where I'd placed it earlier before the evening had detonated. The fabric felt cool beneath my fingertips. Grounding. As I slid one arm into the sleeve, a soft voice broke the silence. Emily? Kelsey. I turned. She stood with her hands clasped, shoulders trembling, mascara streaked. She looked nothing like the bright, confident woman who had hovered near Nathan's arm all year. I want to help, she said. Then cooperate with the FBI, I replied. Tell the truth, all of it. She swallowed. Will they arrest me? That depends on what you signed. And what you knew. Her eyes welled again. But telling the truth, I added, is the only thing that matters now. It's the only thing that will save you. She nodded. Thank you, she whispered. For what? I wasn't entirely sure. Maybe for not hating her. Maybe for not lumping her into a family she never truly belonged to. Or maybe for giving her the permission she didn't know she needed to step away from Nathan's shadow. As I fastened the last button of my coat, Tyler stood as well. Emily, he said, voice thick. I'm sorry. For all of it. For the jokes. For making you feel like the outsider. I never realized how much you did, I interrupted gently. You just never cared enough to stop. His mouth opened, closed. Then he nodded. Even in apology, the truth had weight. Diane's voice returned last. Small, broken, barely audible. Do you hate him? She asked. It was not the question I expected. I considered my answer carefully. No, I said. I don't hate Nathan. They all stared at me surprised, confused, desperate to understand. I breathed out slowly. I loved him, I said. More than he ever realized. more than he ever tried to deserve. But love doesn't survive in a place where it's invisible. Diane's eyes filled with tears. Real tears. Not the performative kind she'd often wielded like weapons. I don't hate him, I repeated, but I don't trust him. And love without trust is just attachment, Gerald murmured. And we helped break it. Yes, I said. You did. No one denied it. Not this time. Before I left, I walked to the head of the table, the place Nathan had claimed as his throne, and reached for the linen napkin I had placed so neatly earlier. I folded it once, twice. A small, controlled motion. A gesture of finality. I set it beside the untouched wine glass. My seat, my silence. My last contribution to a table that had never truly welcomed me. Then I straightened, turned, and walked down the hallway toward the front door. As I reached for the handle, I felt someone watching. Diane, standing in the dining room doorway, looking impossibly small. Emily, she whispered. I paused. She swallowed and said the first honest words I'd ever heard from her. I don't know who my son is. I met her gaze. That, I said gently, is the beginning of truth. And I stepped out into the cool night air. The street was dark, except for the distant glow of the federal vehicles parked around the corner, waiting for statements, for paperwork, for the avalanche of fallout that would unravel the Hale family in the days to come. But the night felt wide, open. For the first time in years, I breathed without restriction. The sky above Silverwood Ridge glittered faintly, mirroring the lake that sat miles behind me, waiting. My cabin, my space, my life, untouched, undefeated, mine. I walked to my car, opened the door, and sat for a long moment with my hands on the steering wheel. The Hale house behind me trembled under the weight of consequences. And I was finally on my way home. The morning after the arrest felt unreal, too quiet, too clean, too still for what had detonated the night before. I woke in my own house, sunlight filtering through curtains I once chose, falling on a bed I hadn't slept in for months. It felt like stepping into a museum of a life I'd already buried. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. A calm, precise voice greeted me. Mrs. Lane, this is Special Agent Dana Cole. We need you at the federal building at 10 a.m. to review documentation and provide a full statement. I sat up, spine straight. Of course, I said. I'll be there. And Emily? Dana added. Yes? Be ready. There's more than you saw last night. My pulse didn't spike. Not anymore. I had lived too long inside the slow burn hell of the Hale machine to be startled by whatever fresh rot Nathan had left behind. I showered, dressed in a simple navy blouse and black trousers, and drove into downtown, feeling strangely like I was heading into a performance I'd been rehearsing for years. The federal building's lobby was all glass, steel, and silence. Dana met me near security. She looked different in daylight, less severe, more human. But her eyes were still the sharp, assessing instruments of someone who'd learned to read truth the way some people read novels. Follow me, she said. We entered a briefing room lined with files. Files thicker than any case I'd imagined. Files with my name, Nathan's name, and the Hale family name. Dana placed a folder in front of me. Before we dive in, she said, you need to understand. Your husband's forged sale of the cabin wasn't an isolated event. It was the trigger that exposed a network of financial misconduct. Not just within your marriage, not just within his family, she tapped the folder, but connected to his work at Interstate First Bank. I met her gaze steadily. Go on. She opened the folder. Inside were spreadsheets, transaction histories, inconsistencies highlighted in yellow, red, and green. What you're looking at, Dana said, is a pattern 6 years' worth of unauthorized access to female clients' financial records. Widows, divorcee, single women with assets they managed alone. A cold understanding spread through me like ink bleeding across fabric. He used the bank system to study them, I murmured. Yes, Dana said, and in some cases, to manipulate them. Nathan isn't smart enough to run something like this alone, I said. Dana's mouth lifted in a small, grim smile. You're absolutely right. She flipped to the next set of documents. On top was a credit application, Kelsey's name on it. Except the income numbers were fake. The signature didn't match. The loan amount was unusually high. I exhaled slowly. He pulled Kelsey in too. He used her information without consent, Dana said. We already confirmed it. When she questioned him, he told her it was a temporary liquidity tool for a business venture. A humorless laugh slipped out of me. That's Nathan. He uses sophisticated language to disguise simple theft. Dana nodded. And theft is only part of it. He leveraged several women's assets, including yours, as collateral for loans made off the books to his brother Tyler and 2 of Tyler's associates. Pieces slid into place like a grotesque puzzle. The restless late-night phone calls. The whispered arguments between Nathan and Tyler. The constant pressure to contribute more to the household. Forward-facing entitlement, masking backward desperation. Your cabin, Dana continued, was essentially a prototype. Nathan planned to replicate the process across other flagged assets. And the only reason it didn't work, I said, is because of the federal classification tied to my clearance. That classification, Dana agreed, saved more than just the cabin. She leaned back, studying me. You're taking this better than most. I've been living in the prelude to this for years, I said. Last night wasn't a shock, it was confirmation. Dana's expression softened. Not with pity, with respect. Emily, she said carefully, we're preparing multiple charges. Wire fraud, forgery, bank fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. But there's something else. She slid another paper forward. A beneficiary change form. My stomach turned cold. The life insurance policy mine. Beneficiary name crossed out. Replaced with Diane Hale. My hand tightened on the edge of the table. He changed it? Dana nodded. 3 months ago. I closed my eyes for a moment, not in pain, but in clarity. He had been preparing to cut me out. Not just financially, structurally, legally. He had been preparing for a world where I was not part of the equation at all. Do Diane and Gerald know? I asked. Dana shook her head. Not yet. Their legal exposure is already significant due to accepting funds derived from fraud. This will add a new dimension. Let it, I said. Dana paused, then spoke quietly. You're not seeking revenge, are you? No, I said. I'm seeking truth. And truth has consequences. She nodded with something like approval. Good. Because you're going to see all of it. She pulled another thick file from the stack and slid it toward me. This, she said, is the group chat Tyler turned over this morning. My eyebrows lifted. He flipped, hard, and early. He doesn't want to go down with Nathan. I opened the file, scrolled through screenshots, and there it was. The Hale family chat. For months, since before I left for Asia. Messages planning how to handle the cabin. Diane urging Nathan to take control of assets before Emily wastes them. Gerald asking if my overseas work would help keep her distracted. Nathan strategizing how to intercept documents. Tyler joking about how Emily won't notice a thing she never does. My breath stayed steady. My hands didn't shake. It was strange, so strange, how the truth didn't wound me anymore. It liberated me. Dana watched me read. You okay? Yes, I said. Finally. She gave a small nod. There's more, she said. I looked up. Show me everything. Dana didn't delay. She opened the next folder with decisive fingers, sliding a clean stack of papers toward me. These, she said, are the audit logs from Interstate First Bank. Nathan accessed over 40 customer files in the last 18 months. All women, all with property they managed alone. I studied the list: widows, single professionals, divorcees. Some lived near Silverwood Ridge. Some owned undeveloped land. All had something in common. No man the Hale family could intimidate or charm. Were they targeted for theft? I asked. Some, Dana said. Some were simply studied, but a few four that we know of experienced unauthorized withdrawals. Nathan covered the trail by routing funds through Tyler's accounts. I exhaled through my nose. So Tyler's not just a witness. No, she said, but he's cooperating. That may save him. And the others? Less cooperative. Meaning Diane and Gerald. Of course. Dana continued flipping through pages, meticulous, controlled, methodical. She wasn't building drama. She was building a case. 3 months ago, she said, tapping a highlighted section. Nathan accessed a restricted database meant only for senior bank analysts. And he's not qualified for that, I said. Correct. But he knew enough to bypass 2 layers of authentication. That's where he collected the data points he needed to forge your cabin documentation. My jaw tightened, but my voice remained level. And this is why Apex Orion flagged the transfer. Yes, she confirmed. The system didn't recognize the authorization pattern. It triggered an automatic alert to our division. That saved the cabin and exposed everything else. I nodded slowly. Nathan had believed he'd finally risen to the level of the intelligent, powerful man he always pretended to be. He'd rehearsed his signature for days, plotted timelines, printed papers, bragged at dinner. He had no idea he was performing directly into the mouth of a federal trap. Dana leaned back. We need your statement now. Everything from the first time the Hales questioned your purchase to the night Nathan sold it. I gave her the truth, clean and precise. No embellishment, no dramatization. Just the facts they had spent years dismissing. When I finished, she closed her notebook. Emily, she said quietly, this is one of the strongest financial abuse cases we've ever handled. Most victims don't have clear evidence. You documented everything. I had to, I said. No one believed me. We do, she replied. Those 2 words landed deeper than she probably intended. She gathered the folders, forming a single thick stack. We're filing the consolidated charges today. Nathan will remain in federal custody without bail. I nodded once. And the Hales? I asked. Dana inhaled. Gerald received approximately $30,000 traced back to unauthorized withdrawals. Diane accepted gifts and transfers Nathan disguised as household reimbursements. Both are liable. And what happens now? I pressed. Within 72 hours, she said. They'll face formal interviews. We'll determine charges after their statements. I absorbed the information quietly. And Kelsey? I asked. We believe she's a victim, Dana replied. She unknowingly co-signed a falsified line of credit Nathan used to cover his debts. I expected resentment. Instead, I felt an odd calm. She should give a full statement, I said. And get her own lawyer. Dana nodded. She already is. Silence settled between us, a clean, final kind of silence. Then, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small object. A keyring. My keyring. The cabin key sat in the center, the silver glinting under fluorescent light. We recovered this from Nathan's desk, she said. He took it before forging the sale. You'll want to change the locks, but it's yours again. She said. The metal felt warm in my palm. Simple. Grounding. Mine. Thank you, I said. She nodded once. There's one more thing. She slid a printed email across the table. From Diane Hale to Nathan Hale. Subject: cabin. If Emily doesn't understand the importance of family stewardship, then you need to handle it for her. She won't notice. She never does. There it was, the truth without disguise. The mindset that fueled everything. Dana stood. You're free to go, Emily. We'll contact you when we need additional testimony. Not testimony, I corrected quietly. Truth. She paused, then gave a small nod of respect. Yes, truth. Outside, sunlight struck the pavement in long, sharp angles. The world looked the same, but I didn't. I walked to my car with the steady steps of someone no longer bracing for impact. My phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number. Kelsey, can we talk someday? Not today. Not soon. But someday. I want to understand how to rebuild. I typed back. Tell the truth first. Everything else comes later. I didn't wait for a response. I started the engine. The road to Silverwood Ridge stretched ahead, quiet, winding, waiting. When I reached the cabin, late afternoon painted the water in cool silver streaks. The pines whispered in the wind. For the first time in months, I unlocked the door without fear of what or who I'd find inside. The cabin welcomed me back without hesitation. No judgment. No entitlement. No manipulation. Just stillness. I set the keys on the wooden table, sunlight glinting off the metal, and exhaled slowly. Nathan had tried to erase me from my own life. But the truth didn't just protect me, it freed me. And the final counter move was the simplest one. I stayed standing. He didn't. 6 months after the sentencing, winter loosened its grip on Silverwood Ridge. The thaw came slowly, at first melting snow dripping from pine branches, the lake shedding its thin crust of ice, the air warming just enough that I could leave the windows cracked without freezing. Life had found a quieter rhythm, one I didn't know I had been starving for. Most mornings started the same way now. I'd wake before dawn, not because of an alarm or marital obligation, but because the cabin settled into silence at that hour, an invitation I never wanted to waste. I'd brew coffee, the rich scent filling the kitchen, and wrap myself in a soft charcoal sweater before stepping out onto the deck. The lake always greeted me differently. Sometimes, a fog rolled so thick, it felt like the world beyond the water didn't exist. Sometimes, sunlight filtered through the pines in thin, sharp rays. And some mornings, my favorite, the lake looked like glass, perfectly still, mirroring the sky so flawlessly it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. I'd sit with my mug warm between my hands and watch the world wake up. No noise, no pressure, no Hale family, no Nathan's expectations gnawing at the edges of my sanity. Just breath, just quiet, just me. The cabin had become less of a sanctuary and more of a home, my home, rebuilt not with construction, but with intention. The second bedroom had transformed into a consulting office with 2 monitors, neat binder stacks, and a corkboard covered in international project schedules. Apex Orion referred clients directly to me now, and word had spread. I didn't chase work anymore. It came to me. Sometimes, mid-meeting, I'd catch my own reflection in the screen, shoulders straight, eyes clear, a voice steady, and almost laugh at how different I looked from the woman who once apologized for taking up space in her own kitchen. A woman who used to shrink. A woman who used to fold. A woman who used to survive instead of live. Not anymore. My income tripled in the first quarter alone. By the second, it quadrupled. Money didn't buy peace, but it funded freedom, and freedom built the life I wanted, no, the life I deserved. The divorce had finalized swiftly. Michigan law was merciless toward a spouse who committed financial crimes against the other, and the judge didn't mince words as she granted me full control of every marital asset. The suburban house sold within a month. The funds went into my separate account. I donated most of the furniture, Too many memories embedded into the grain of those tables and couch cushions, then kept only the things that were genuinely mine. Diane had sent one letter, just one, handwritten in her looping cursive, careful and uncharacteristically restrained. "I don't expect forgiveness," she wrote, "but I hope you know I never meant for it to go this far. If I had understood what Nathan was capable of, I might have protected you instead of encouraging him." It was the closest she had ever come to an apology. I didn't reply. Some truths don't need words to settle. They just need distance. Gerald sent nothing. Tyler sent scattered updates about cooperating with investigators and rebuilding his messy finances. And Kelsey surprisingly sent a simple text months after her statement. "Thank you for not letting me drown with them." She didn't owe me anything, and I owed her nothing. But sometimes, two people escape the same fire and learn to stop blaming each other for the smoke they inhaled. We weren't friends, but we were no longer enemies either. That felt like enough. Nathan wrote 3 letters from prison. The first accused me of betrayal. The second demanded I retract my statements. The third arrived on a Thursday in early spring, scrawled on lined paper. I didn't know about the federal flag. If I had, things would be different. I should have talked to you. Maybe we could have figured something out. He never apologized. Not once. It struck me then that even stripped of everything his power, his ego, his curated image, Nathan still believed he had been wronged. His entitlement survived incarceration. That letter went into a drawer I rarely opened. Some things don't require closure. They require containment. 8 months post-sentencing, a small moment shifted my life in a way I didn't expect. I was standing on the deck after a long consulting call with an overseas client when my phone buzzed. "Agent Melissa Tran, how's the cabin holding up?" I smiled before typing back. "Steadier than ever." Her reply came instantly. "Makes sense. Places built for the right people don't collapse. People just forget they're allowed to stay." I stared at the message for a long time. She was right. The cabin hadn't saved me. It had simply waited for me to return to myself. And I had, with every morning coffee on the deck, every finished project, every quiet breath unshackled from performance. Every night I slept without bracing for criticism. Every moment I allowed joy to bloom without asking permission. I wasn't rebuilding anymore. I was living. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. By early summer, Silverwood Ridge had settled into a rhythm that felt almost like a second heartbeat. The lake warmed, the pines darkened to a deeper green, and the trails behind the cabin filled with the small, unremarkable sounds of returning wildlife. Life didn't feel dramatic here. It felt earned. My routines had become rituals. Morning runs along the ridge, cool air against my skin, birds cutting through the silence. Consulting calls from my sunlit home office, real work, real respect, real autonomy. Evenings spent on the deck with a book or a glass of wine, hours that belonged only to me. For years, I had survived inside a life that expected me to shrink so others could feel larger. Now, my days expanded without permission, and for the first time, I wasn't apologizing for taking up space. The legal aftermath quieted down in the background of my life. Nathan's appeal was denied. Diane and Gerald faced heavy fines but no jail time, largely because Tyler's testimony proved they were manipulated rather than masterminds. Kelsey rebuilt her finances with the help of a pro bono attorney from the Victim Advocacy Office. No one asked me for help. No one asked me for forgiveness. That silence was its own gift. One afternoon, while reorganizing the cabin storage closet, I found the notebook I'd once used to track my escape plan, the same notebook Nathan had stolen to practice forging my signature. I sat on the floor, flipping through pages filled with budgeting notes, timelines, backup passwords, instructions to myself written in the blunt tone of someone surviving, not living. I should have felt anger. Instead, I felt gratitude for the version of me who had planned ahead, even while exhausted. She had left me a map. I had simply followed it. Later that week, I drove into town for groceries. At the checkout line, the cashier, a woman in her 50s with a silver braid, recognized me from the federal hearings she'd watched on the news. "You look lighter," she said as she handed me my receipt. I didn't explain why. I didn't have to. Freedom shows on the face in ways no makeup can cover. On the drive back, I turned off the main road and took the long route through the woods. The sunlight cut through branches in shifting stripes. The road curved, dipped, rose again. The kind of landscape that would have terrified me to drive alone years ago. Now, it felt like a reminder. I was allowed to steer my own life. When I pulled up to the cabin, the lake was catching the late afternoon sun silver, still, quiet. I stepped out of the car and rested both hands on the railing of the deck. The air smelled like pine sap and warm wood. The world felt deliberately calm. My phone buzzed. Agent Melissa Tran. Thinking about heading north this fall. "Coffee?" I typed back. "Come by any time. The cabin likes you." Her reply came a moment later. "It likes who you've become." I set the phone aside, letting her message settle in the space around me. Who I'd become. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't triumphant in the cinematic sense. It was steady. It was clear. It was mine. I walked back inside, opened the windows, and let the breeze push through the rooms. The curtains lifted gently. The floors creaked under my feet. The cabin breathed with me. For years, this place had been painted as the symbol of my stubbornness, my selfishness, my supposed emotional instability. The Hales had mocked it, Nathan had violated it, and for a while I had feared they might ruin it beyond repair. But the truth was simple. They never understood the cabin because they never understood me. You can't destroy what you never took the time to see. As the sun dipped lower, turning the lake into a sheet of molten gold, I stepped onto the deck with a fresh mug of coffee. Not wine, not tea. Coffee, the drink I'd once made every morning for someone who never tasted the intention behind it. Now I made it for myself. The deck boards were warm beneath my bare feet. The wind carried the soft rustle of pine needles. A pair of deer moved quietly through the brush near the waterline. This was not escape. This was arrival. I lifted the mug, letting the steam brush my face, and whispered into the quiet. They thought they took the best thing I had, but they didn't. They took the part of my life that held me small. They took the part of me that doubted. They took the cage. And by doing that, they set me free. The moral of my story wasn't about revenge or punishment. It wasn't even about justice. It was about truth, the kind that stands when everything else collapses. The truth that says, you are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to take back what was yours. You are allowed to live a life that doesn't require shrinking. I stood there until the sky faded into blue-gray dusk, the lake reflecting the first few stars. My phone stayed silent on the table behind me. No Hales, no apologies, no guilt. Just a message from Melissa. A reminder that the people who see you don't need explanations. And then, the quiet. The kind that feels like healing. If this story feels familiar, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or quietly erased, you're not alone. Financial abuse and invisible marriages happen far more often than people talk about. If you believe everyone deserves to reclaim their voice, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. It's free, and it helps these stories reach someone who might need the reminder that walking away is not failure. It's freedom.